A chord progression is a set of 2 or more chords that takes the listener on a journey through a song, whether it's happy, sad, angry, dreamy, jazzy, funky, heroic, or mysterious. The big question though is, how do I make my progressions sound like any of these emotions? This is level 2 in my 7-part How to Make Chord Progressions series. If you're new, I recommend checking out the first video where I go over the basics. But in this level, we're going to break down how chord progressions work and how to structure your own progressions to get the sound you want. The main way we convey emotions in our chord progressions is by always keeping 2 things in mind: tension and resolution. Tension happens when a chord creates a pull towards another chord. When you hear tension in a progression, your ear naturally feels anticipation and suspense and wants to move somewhere more relaxing. And that somewhere is called resolution. Resolution is the release of that tension, that moment when the progression lands somewhere stable, calm, or at rest, giving your ear a sense of satisfaction and making you feel like the journey you've just gone on is complete. Now, great chord progressions have a good balance of tension and resolution, because if you have too little tension and all resolution, the progression can sound really boring. But if it's too tense, it can be exhausting to the listener because there's not enough payoff for all of that suspense. So in order to create that balance of tension and resolution, you have to split the chords of the major chord scale into 3 different categories: tonic chords, dominant chords, and subdominant chords. Tonic chords are your home base. They're the chords every progression revolves around, giving the strongest sense of resolution and the least amount of tension of the 3 types. You'll typically use these at the start of a progression to set the mood, or at the end to give that feeling of finally coming home after your journey through the previous tension building chords. They can also be used as a pit stop in a longer progression to take a breath before continuing with more of the other chords. But any way you use them, 99% of the time, you'll have at least 1 tonic chord to act as home base in your progression. There are 2 tonic chords we can use in the major chord scale, with those being the 1 and the 6 chords. The 1 is your major tonic, which usually gives off a major or happy vibe to the progression. And the 6 is your minor tonic, which gives off a minor or more somber resolution. And when making a chord progression, you usually want to stick to 1 tonic chord to structure your progression around and resolve to, but that doesn't mean you can't use both tonics in a progression. You definitely can. Now next up is dominant chords. Dominant chords are going to be your main tension chords in a progression. They're best used right before a tonic chord to create as much tension as you can to make the resolution to the tonic even more satisfying. But they can also be used before non-tonic chords and sound pretty nice. And for right now, there's only 1 dominant chord in the major chord scale, and that's the 5 chord. As an example of using the dominant and tonic, let's try going from the 5 to the 1 chord in the key of C major. You can kind of hear how our 5 chord G major doesn't really feel like a good resting spot. It really wants to go somewhere else. Well, to resolve that tension, we go to our major tonic, C major, and suddenly all of that tension is resolved and you feel back at home. And we can do the same thing for our minor tonic, going from the 5 to the 6, giving a similar feeling of resolution just with a minor twist. And if you really wanted to, you can make a whole song out of just these 2 chords, like thousands of musicians throughout history, by constantly looping between the tension and resolution of the dominant and tonic. It's one of the most simple but best sounding movements you can add to your progressions. But just playing the same 2 chords can sound a bit boring after a while, and that's where subdominant chords come in. Subdominant chords are like a less intense version of the dominant. They're usually used after the tonic to act as a bridge, adding movement and a subtle amount of tension in the progression to smoothly transition to either a dominant or another tonic chord. And in the major chord scale, the subdominant chords are the 2, 3, and 4. Now let's take a look at a few of the most common chord progressions and how these 3 types of chords work together. Starting with the progression I showed in level 1, the 1, 4, 5 is the textbook definition of how to use the tonic, dominant, and subdominant. We start out with our major tonic 1, establishing the tonal center / home chord of our progression. Then we move to the subdominant 4, which adds a little bit of tension while also acting as our bridge to the dominant chord 5, which naturally wants to be pulled back to our tonic. And this creates a nice cycle of tension and resolution. But we can also replace our major tonic with the minor tonic to change up the mood of the progression without affecting the overall structure. Now let's try a different progression, the 1, 5, 6, 4. As you probably noticed, this chord progression has 2 tonics in it, but like I said before, we can have more than one tonic in a progression. It's just that one of them has to be the main tonic or home chord, which is typically placed at the beginning or end, while the other is being used to give a small sense of resolution, acting as an unexpected detour or pit stop, kind of like a subdominant, before building tension again and resolving back to the main tonic. And again, let's switch these chords around and make the main tonic our minor tonic and see how that changes the mood of it. Now another thing I said before was that the tonic doesn't always have to be the first chord in the progression. You can also have the dominant and subdominant building tension right out the gate before coming home to the tonic, and it works extremely well. And there's no better example of that than the 2-5-1 progression. We start out with our subdominant 2, which acts as the bridge to the dominant chord 5, which builds the most tension to then resolve to our major tonic 1. By the way, this progression is going to be really important in later levels, so make sure you're familiar with this one. Another common variation of this progression is where you add a 6 at the beginning, making it a 6-2-5-1. Something else to keep in mind when you're making and playing chord progressions is actually where you play them. One way is to play all of the chords of a progression on one string. For example, let's say you play a 2-5-1 just using A string shapes. Or just E string shapes. Both of those are perfectly fine ways to play that 2-5-1, but in some progressions it can feel kinda jumpy and disjointed when hopping up and down the neck to get to each chord. The way to fix this, like you may have noticed in previous examples, is by utilizing the E and A string shapes that are close to each other on the fretboard. The way I like to think about it is by splitting the major chord scale into different zones. A zone is a section of the fretboard about 6 to 7 frets wide that contains all 7 notes of the scale. So if you stick to one zone, you can play your whole chord progression using just the shapes available inside of it. And here's a few examples of how we can play that same 2-5-1 using different zones on the fretboard. It might be disorienting at first jumping from string to string, but once you get used to playing in these zones, coming up with different ways to play progressions becomes way easier, and your chords will sound more cohesive and connected because the notes inside of them are physically closer together. So spend some time getting familiar with these zones, patterns, and the relationships between the notes inside of them. Whether you're jumping from string to string or moving the chords horizontally on one string, it'll seriously pay off in the long run. And the last thing I want to talk about in this level is adding rhythm to your progressions. Playing static chords one at a time with no real sense of rhythm can only take you so far. Even if you've got the best progression, it won't be nearly as good if you don't have a good rhythm going with it. I'm gonna keep this section short, but I recommend experimenting around with playing chords one string at a time, also known as arpeggiating. using strumming patterns, arpeggiating or strumming only a select few strings from each chord, experimenting with the duration of each chord, and using some muted strums to add a bit of groove to your strumming patterns. And that's the end of level 2. So as a quick recap, good chord progressions come from balancing the right amount of tension and resolution, and we can create that by using a combination of tonic, dominant, and subdominant chords from the major chord scale. The 1 and 6 are your tonic chords, the 2, 3, and 4 are your subdominant chords, and the 5 is your dominant chord, with the general rules being that tonics are your home or resolution chords, dominants are your big tension chords, and subdominants are your smaller tension chords that act as the bridge connecting the dominant and tonic chords in a progression. We also looked at how to keep your progressions flowing smoothly by staying inside 6 to 7 fret-wide zones on the fretboard to take advantage of chords that are closer together, along with how experimenting with rhythm can add a bit of groove and life to your progressions. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from this level, it's that everything I've talked about isn't a set of concrete rules you have to follow to make quote-unquote good sounding chord progressions. It's just general guidelines. You can use any combination of tonic, dominant, and subdominant chords you want. It's all about experimenting and using these guidelines to figure out what sounds best to you. And if you want to continue learning and growing as a guitarist, or just feel lost on where to go next, I recommend checking out my course Guitar Accelerator. It's a huge library of lessons where I guide you through everything I know on guitar and how to apply it in your playing, put into an easy to follow roadmap that any guitarist can jump into, along with a supportive Discord community to hang out and chill with other like-minded guitarists. And if that's not your cup of tea, you can check out my Patreon where you'll get early access to every new video completely ad-free, along with tabs for all of my arrangements. I'm really looking forward to you guys seeing the next few levels in this series where we go over the stuff that really makes your progression stand out. And if you want to see more videos like this, liking and subscribing would be much appreciated. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.